Hokage give me a face. Conan, Chapter 81-100. Chapter 81-Thief. When the man came over, his eyes kept rolling around, as if he was observing something. Soon, the wretched man walked behind the beautiful woman, stopped there, and never moved forward. Such an obvious behavior is obviously cutting the queue, and it is still in Yizan's team. In this low-level martial arts world, Yizan seldom took action, because he felt that these guys with only 5 combat power were not worth his shot at all. Moreover, now that Shaolin was in front of him, Yizan of course had to maintain a gentle appearance, so Yizan stretched out his hand and poked the wretched man. After being poked by Yizan with his finger, the wretched man immediately became unhappy, turned his head to look at Yizan, and said with great dissatisfaction, "What are you doing? Do we know each other? Just stab me with your finger." Still maintaining a faint smile, Yizan said, "I'm sorry, if you want to watch a movie, please go to the back and line up." If I didn't say this, but when I said it, the wretched-looking man was still a little unhappy, and immediately opened his eyes, stared at Yizan, and said, "Do you know who I am? If there are people in the area who don't know me, I won't line up, what's the matter?" Quote. Yizan has never paid attention to such a young person, and was about to slap him away, but Shaolin, who was behind him, stood up first. "Why are you so rude? This is a public place, everyone is queuing up, why are you cutting the line?" Shaolin said with an angry face. Shaolin, who is full of sense of justice, does not allow such a thing to happen in front of her. Of course, she must quickly uphold justice and cannot let such people take advantage of the loopholes. Shaolin's voice was louder, and everyone around heard it, and they all turned their heads and looked over here. Although this wretched man still wanted to say something, he swallowed what he wanted to say under the eyes of everyone, just snorted coldly and walked back. After the wretched man left, everyone looked at Shaolin with admiration, which made Shaolin feel a little embarrassed, but Yizan stood behind him. Soon, Yizan and Shaolin bought popcorn and snacks, and returned to the seats where they were waiting for admission, and took a short rest. At this moment, the wretched man in the coat appeared again. He was in the snack vending machine, lining up behind a fat woman. The fat woman was wearing jewels, and at first glance she looked like a rich man. The black mink coat she was wearing was very valuable, and the small bag she was wearing was also very valuable. The wretched man glanced left and right, and found that no one noticed him, so he stretched out his hand from under his coat, holding a knife in his hand, and slowly reached out to the delicate little bag. Although the man's movements were very careful, Yizan and Shaolin saw it clearly. When the man appeared, he couldn't help but look at him a few more times. I didn't expect that he was really doing bad things. Seeing this scene, Shaolin, who had a strong sense of justice, how could she allow such a thing to happen, and quickly shouted, "Thief, what do you want to do?" When this sentence was shouted, the man who was about to attack immediately shuddered, and the knife in his hand almost fell to the ground. And the fat woman, also reminded by this sentence, immediately turned her head and looked behind her, just in time to see that the man was about to steal her things. "Okay, you thief, you still want to steal my things." The fat woman was also angry, and quickly picked up her bag and smashed it. After being smashed, the man who stole was also angry, took out a dazzling dagger from behind, placed it in front of him, and said to the fat woman, "Come here again, and I will stab you to death." Showing the dagger in front of the crowd naturally startled everyone. With the man at the center, everyone dispersed, and the fat woman didn't dare to get angry again. Seeing that everyone was shocked, the man was even more proud, turned around, and snorted coldly at Shaolin and Yizan, "You two wait for me, I will make you look good." After speaking, the man hurriedly left the cinema and walked outside. After all, there were security guards here, so he didn't dare to stay long. "I dare to threaten me, I must teach him a lesson." Shaolin's temper also came up, and she wanted to rush out to fight the wretched man. You know, Shaolin is a master of the Taekwondo club. She is just such a guy. She doesn't take it seriously. It really annoys her, and she doesn't have to deal with it. But Yizan grabbed Shaolin, raised the ticket in her hand, and said, "The movie will start soon. Why bother with that guy? Let's go to the movie." Shaolin, who was still a little angry at first, nodded after hearing what Yizan said, and didn't bother with that guy anymore, turned around and went to the movie with Yizan first. After entering the cinema, Yizan and 697 people found a place, put out snacks to eat and drink, and watched the movie while eating. This is still Yizan and Shaolin watching a movie alone. Naturally they have a different feeling. Originally wanted to talk to Shaolin, but Yizan didn't have the opportunity. Shaolin just watched the plot in the movie and found it very exciting and attractive, but didn't pay attention to what Yizan said. In this case, Yizan didn't go to talk to little Lando anymore, just sat on the side eating popcorn, waiting for the movie to end. After watching the movie, it was already past 10 o'clock at night. At this time, for this city, it may still be a lively time. Young people like to go around and enjoy the happy nightlife this night. Yizan and Shaolin came out of the movie theater. The lights outside were Yuhi wine green. On the avenue, there were often some luxury cars driving by, and there was an endless stream of people coming and going. Glancing at the distance, Yizan turned his head and said, "Shaolin, it's still early, why don't we go have something to eat?" Taking out her watch and looking at it, Shaolin shook her head and said, "I don't want it anymore. It's already 10 o'clock. I have to go back early. If I go back late, my father will scold me." Chapter 82-bastard or something. Yizan knew a lot about Maori Kogoro's character. If Shaolin really didn't go home at night with him, I'm afraid that guy Maori would be very happy. Why would he scold her? But Shaolin said so. Yizan didn't know what to say, so he could only say, "Well, I'll drive you." "Well, thank you." Shaolin smiled and nodded, expressing her gratitude to Yizan, revealing a sweet wine vortex, which made people take a few more glances. At this time, from an alley not far away, there was a shout, "Delicious Yuhi grilled seafood, come and try it." As the voice fell, a strange fragrance floated over here, and the attractive smell made Yizan couldn't help but look over. Shaolin was even more excited. Her eyes seemed to bloom like little stars. She clasped her small fists in both hands, and said happily, "Wow, it's really Yuhi's seafood. Hurry up and have a look. I want to go to eat. I haven't had something so delicious for a long time." Seeing Shaolin like this, Yizan couldn't help but cast a glance at her, and said in his heart, "Aren't you hungry before, but now you want to eat again? You're really a foodie." But it was not easy to dampen Shaolin's happiness. Yizan nodded and said, "Okay, let's go together, just in time for me to taste it. What kind of delicious food is this?" "Yeah," Shaolin nodded, showing a smile, and then said, "This is a very delicious thing. I loved it when I was a child, but I can't eat it now." Following Shaolin to Yuhi's seafood stall, Yizan discovered that this is a special product unique to a seaside city. In a city rich in seafood, it is good at making all kinds of delicious food and grilling it together. This feeling makes everyone feel very delicious. After taking a bite, it is guaranteed to be unforgettable for a long time. And this stall is placed in a small alley. After people who come and go have ordered some, they will pack it away and taste the food while walking. The person who set up the stall was an elderly man. He hunched over his body, stroked his white beard, and smiled at Shaolin. "Little girl, what you like to eat, order it yourself. I want this, and this." Shaolin seemed to be familiar with these things, and quickly ordered these delicacies. After ordering, Shaolin smiled and stretched out 2 fingers, shook it in front of the old man, and said, "Grandpa, give me 2 copies of each of these things I just ordered." "Okay, no problem." The old man showed a smile, and quickly took Shaolin's order and took it to Yuhi to burn. At this moment, Yizan's brows suddenly wrinkled, and his eyes couldn't help squinting to the side. With Yizan's strongest perception, he immediately discovered that there were several people behind this alley, following them all the time. While they were baking, these people, all carrying tools, quickly rushed out from behind. Under the lights of the small alley, The figures of these people were stretched longer and longer, stepping on the alley, and the standing water on the side of the road reflected their figures. The one in front of these people is the one who was exposed by Shaolin before, who stole something in the movie theater, and then was discovered. The short man waved his hand and shouted at Yizan, "Stinky boy, you are finished tonight, I finally found you." With that said, the short man said to the tall men behind him, "Big brother, it's this man and woman. When I was about to attack, they suddenly exposed me and I was almost caught." The few men who followed behind this short man were not good people at first glance. Everyone looked fierce, with tattoos on their bodies, iron bars in their hands, and they were full of anger. A man with a scar on his face, carrying the iron rod in his hand, walked out with a cold snort, pointed the iron rod in his hand at Yizan, but turned his head to the short man and said, "Hey, Yamada-kun, is it these two guys? I want them to look good." Quote. This group of people quickly surrounded Yizan and Shaolin. This sudden scene shocked Shaolin. She has always been a good child who abides by the law. When did she encounter this kind of thing? Scene. Who was cooking Yuhi's seafood took a few steps back in fear, without saying a word, and the expression on his face changed when he looked at these guys who suddenly appeared. Yizan didn't take these guys seriously. In Yizan's opinion, the human beings in this world are different from those ordinary people in the Dragon Ball world who have only 5 combat power. Seeing that Yizan and the others didn't speak, the man with the iron rod in his hand thought that Yizan and the others were afraid, so he waved the iron rod in his hand and walked slowly over here. While shaking the iron rod in his hand, the tall man sneered, "You really don't know how high the sky is. We have the final say in this area. You two dare to provoke us. Prepare to be punished." Having said that, this tall man is also considered ruthless, and he swung the iron rod in his hand quickly, and the direction he swung down was exactly beside Yizan. In the eyes of this man, the power of this stick is very powerful. As long as it is smashed quickly, it will definitely make Yizan scream. "Ah, Yizan, be careful." Shaolan, who was behind her, saw this scene and hurriedly shouted. Seeing that the stick was about to fall on Yizan's body, suddenly, Yizan raised his right hand and lightly placed it on top of his head. Bang! The iron rod suddenly hit Yizan's arm and made a very dull sound. If a voice that makes people sound very painful, if it hits a person, the feeling can be imagined. Man grinned and looked at Yizan. "Look at your arrogance, not arrogant." For his own attack, the man is very confident. If such a powerful attack hits an ordinary person, I am afraid that the arm will be directly scrapped. Chapter 83 _ The sadness of the bottom of society. But after the iron rod hit Yizan, Yizan didn't change anything. The whole person still stood there, didn't move, didn't even scream in pain. Time was so immersed for 3 seconds, everyone looked at Yizan and thought he would lie on the ground and yell, but they were all disappointed. Yizan didn't even show a painful expression. But what surprised the people around was that there was a curved mark in the middle of the iron rod as thick as an arm, which was obviously bent by smashing. The man who started the attack took a few deep breaths, and he couldn't help but let out some snot, and then he sucked it back. You're actually fine," the man said in surprise. His voice was very nervous and looked a little scared. "HMPH, it's still too tender just because of you guys." The corner of Yizan's mouth raised slightly, and a terrifying aura and power suddenly burst out from him. Yizan is not a vegetarian. At the moment when his breath broke out, he raised his right hand and punched out a punch. The power of this punch, Yizan can be said to be depressed, but only lightly bombarded it out. 967. However, even so, after the man received Yizan's punch again, the man still flew upside down, flying 3 or 4 meters in midair, and then fell quickly, hitting the ground heavily, screaming miserably. A sound. But in the eyes of the rest of the people, Yizan's punch can be said to be very powerful, almost to the point of terror, and they feel their scalps go numb just by looking at it. Unexpectedly, his random punch would have knocked this guy into the air. Yizan retracted his fist and sighed slightly. "I have already controlled the power, but I didn't expect it to have such a large lethality. After the tall man landed, he almost vomited blood when he heard this sentence, and he couldn't help but retreat back, but he couldn't stand up at all and could only crawl on the ground. With his eyes fixed on Yi Zan, the tall man quickly waved his hand and shouted, "Give me all of you and kill this guy." Although they have seen Yi Zan's powerful strength, they are a little reluctant to go forward, but they dare not ignore the boss's orders. These men bit Kiba hard, picked up the guy in their hands, and rushed over past. Several gangsters attacked at the same time. Yi Zan didn't even blink his eyes, and he was not afraid at all, and a sneer appeared on the corner of his mouth. "A bunch of things that are beyond their control, see how I deal with you." Seeing these people rushing over, Shaolin was startled and said quickly, "Yi Zan, let's go quickly, there are too many of them." Gently patted the back of Shaolin's hand, Yi Zan said, "Don't be afraid, it's fine with me here." Although Shaolin is a master of Taekwondo at school, she is still inexperienced when encountering these gangsters in the society, and the ruthlessness of the other party makes Shaolin a little at a loss. But Yi Zan is different. His strength has reached a peak. For him, these little bastards are easier than pulling out a single hair. So, just when Yi Zan was comforting Shaolin, a gangster with a machete came to Yi Zan and quickly chopped down the knife in his hand. Before the blade arrived, Yi Zan started to move, his right foot quickly lifted, and then flew out several kicks. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Yi Zan's movements were like several shadows. Those guys were all kicked before they could see what was going on in a hurry. Ouch! Several screams sounded in a row, and these guys were kicked out and flew backwards quickly. After they all landed on the ground, everyone spit out a mouthful of blood, and they looked at Yi Zan with extreme horror. At this time, Shaolan quickly ran to Yi Zan's side, patted the dust on his body, and quickly said, "Are you all right?" With a slight smile, Yi Zan opened his arms and said with a smile, "Do you think I look like I have something to do?" Then Yi Zan's eyes sank, and he shouted to the little bastards, "I'll spare you this time. If I see you doing evil again, I will definitely not spare you, so get out of here." Yi Zan's words, just like the grace of God, made these little gangsters quickly get up from the ground, support each other and run into the distance, without even the courage to look back. Seeing these little gangsters all run away, Shaolin said involuntarily, "I really didn't expect you to be so powerful, so many people are not your opponents." Yi Zan was naturally happy to be praised, but in order not to reveal his secrets, he had to laugh. "Of course, I have practiced. Of course, I will not pay attention to a few thieves." However, after the gangsters ran away, Yi Zan also noticed that the wretched man who stole things from before, the guy named Yamada-kun, ran away for a long time without knowing where he was going, and he didn't see anyone. "It's really a guy who rubs oil on the soles of his feet," Yi Zan said involuntarily. He just thought it was a bit ridiculous for such a guy, and didn't pay much attention to it. Not paying attention to the few thugs who escaped, Yi Zan turned to the old man who set up the stall and said, "Is everything ready?" Seeing Yi Zan so mighty, the old man was really taken aback. He didn't dare to hesitate, and quickly took out all the baked goods. "It's all baked, it's here, you can take it." Having said that, the old man handed over the packed boxes himself, with a trembling expression on his face. He didn't dare to say anything more. Yi Zan didn't care so much. After taking the things, he took out several large bills from his pocket and handed them to the old man. "It's hard work, take it." Seeing so much money, the old man quickly waved his hand and said, "I can't use this much, it's really too much, no need, no need." Knowing that the old man did not dare to accept his own money, Yi Zan deliberately turned gloomy and said, "Do you look down on me?" Having said all this, the old man dared to say anything, quickly took the money, and thanked Yi Zan 1,000 times. He was very moved. Chapter 84-Shaolin in the night. Yi Zan was a little bored looking at the old man's gratitude. To be honest, for Yi Zan, it is really not unusual for others to thank him like this. He waved his hand and said, "You don't need to thank me much. It's already so late, you'd better go back early, it's dangerous to be outside alone. No matter how prosperous the place is, there will be suffering and crisis hidden at the bottom of society. This is an unavoidable situation. Yes, I'll go back right away. The old man nodded quickly, and was about to pack his things and go back. He didn't dare to stop when such a thing happened tonight. After Yizan and the others took away all the food they were going to eat, the old man said with some fear, "Young people today are really amazing. It's terrible to do anything if you disagree." It was just these words that Yizan didn't hear after he left. They had already walked out of the alley and came to the avenue outside. What just happened, to them, was just like a joke. It just added some fun to their formation, and there was nothing to worry about. But what they didn't expect was that this seemingly small thing would cause them trouble in the future. The night was getting darker. Yizan and Shaolin were walking on the street. There were a lot fewer people, and the street lights seemed a little lonely in the night. Occasionally, a few cars drove past, and only a shadow was left behind, and there was a low roar of the engine. Phew, a gust of night wind blew, and Shaolan couldn't help but shrank, and couldn't help sneezing. "What's the matter, is it too cold?" Yizan asked with concern, and quickly took off his clothes and put them on Shaolan. At first, Shaolan wanted to refuse, but the moment she and Yizan made eye contact, she suddenly felt a strange feeling, which made her heart feel hot. In this way, Shaolan did not reject Yizan's actions. She put on his clothes and showed a faint smile. "Thank you, Yizan." Indifferent smile, Yizan said, "Let's go, it's getting late, I'll take you back." Shaolan agreed, and the two walked in the direction of the parking lot. They left the TV station before, but the car stopped there and did not drive away. Now when they go back to drive, they are just in time. The two quickly arrived outside the TV station's parking lot. Yizan found his super cool sports car. After the two got in, they quickly got into the car. The engine sounded, and the sports car quickly drove out of the parking lot, headed outside, and in no time at Maori's detective office. Yizan drove very fast and arrived at Shaolan's house in a short while. Looking out through the car window, Maori didn't seem to have slept yet, and the lights of the detective's office were still on. Although Maori is usually carefree and more casual in dealing with people, he still cares more about his daughter. Having arrived home, Shaolan took off her clothes and put it back into Yizan's car, then smiled slightly and said, "Then I'll go back first, and you can go back to rest early." Just when Shaolan was about to go out, Yizan suddenly reached out and grabbed Shaolan, which surprised the other party, turned his head quickly, and looked at Yizan in surprise. Without any hesitation, Yizan said to Shaolan, "You are so beautiful tonight." Although she didn't express much, Shaolan couldn't help but froze for a moment, and then a yuhi dizziness appeared on her cheeks, and her breathing became a little short. I didn't expect that Shaolan, who is usually more cheerful, would be so shy in this kind of thing, which surprised Yizan a little. However, just as Yizan was about to say something, Shaolan quickly broke free from Yizan's hand and walked outside the car. Before leaving, she didn't forget to say, "What are you talking about? It's really annoying." After speaking, Shaolan quickly accelerated her pace, like a gust of wind, and rushed to the Maori detective agency. Seeing Shaolan coming home, Yizan raised the corner of his mouth slightly, showing a smile. Without saying anything, he drove his car directly, stepped on the accelerator, and walked away. Soon, Yizan returned to his villa and ran for a day, wanting to rest for a while. He came to the bathroom, put a tub of hot water, and lay down comfortably inside. The feeling of being surrounded by hot water made Yizan extremely comfortable. He enjoyed this time very much. It made him feel very relaxed and suitable for thinking. Unconsciously, a strange sound suddenly sounded in Yizan's mind, who was lying in the bathtub. In other words, this is not a sound, but some strange things. These things Yizan is very familiar with, but also very unfamiliar. These adjectives are very strange, but this is how Yizan feels, because these things are the fate that Yizan has always realized. Unexpectedly, at this time, there was a small explosion. Yizan can clearly feel that in his mind. His soul is soaring and sublimating, the whole person seems to be different, and the feeling of being reborn has made Yizan, who has always been very powerful, not realize this for a long time. Feel it. Between ignorance and ignorance, Yizan opened his eyes. Huh, Yizan let out a long breath. The understanding of fate has grown a lot. Yizan knows that this is the result of his diligence and diligence these days, not picking up girls, but following the flow of fate to handle cases in various places. Well, Yizan doesn't think about it. He didn't pick up girls. Pushed the garden, and also got Maulilan. If the bubble girl paper mode was turned on, wouldn't it become a stallion? Shaking his head, Yizan didn't think about these worries. He lay comfortably in the bathtub and exhaled a long breath. At this speed, it is estimated that it will not be long before he can make himself further in the practice of destiny. Sure enough, we still need to solve the case before we can continue to improve, but it's so tiring. Yizan Yangtian sighed, saying that he really didn't want to work hard, he just wanted to watch the flowers and the moon with his sister, and do some love. Things like that. Chapter 85 _ The deceased is a punk. It's still comfortable to lie on the bunk. After taking a bath, Yizan returned to his bedroom, lay on the soft big bed, and had a video chat with number 18. In the video, number 18 looked a little tired and seemed to be exhausted, but after seeing Yizan, he still showed a smile. I haven't been by your side recently, how are you? I'm fine, by the way, when are you coming back? Yizan said to number 18 in the video after taking a sip of the drink on the bed. When asked this question, number 18 seemed to cover up a bit, but after hesitating for a while, he still smiled. Come on, I'll be back soon after I'm done with my business here. Although this tiny emotion was captured by Yizan, Yizan didn't think much about it. After all, it was number 18. Yizan really couldn't think of any difficult problems, so he nodded and said, okay, I'll wait. Come back as soon as possible. Afterwards, the two chatted for a while before turning off the video and resting for each other. Yizan was lying on the bed, but he couldn't fall asleep. After all, Yuanzi had disappeared for so long, and he still didn't wake up. What was it that attacked her? This was also a headache for him. Taking out the crystal clear bead, Yizan put it in his hand and looked at it, swearing in his heart that he must find the cause of the matter quickly. Just thinking about these things, after a while, Yizan slowly fell asleep. Since he began to realize his destiny, Yizan often needs to keep sleeping. After all, his head is tired. And only in this way will those powers be better released. In the early morning of the next day, Yizan was still in his sleep when the phone number of the police officer Miu Miu suddenly called. Yizan picked up the phone and looked at it, and immediately became suspicious. Call me so early, is there something wrong? Already. When Yizan answered the phone, Officer Miu Miu on the other end of the phone quickly said, Yizan, it's not good, something has happened, a body was found by a small river on Jinma Road, hurry up. Come and see. Sitting up from the bed, Yizan picked up the phone and asked, Golden Horse Road. Yizan also knew a lot about this city. The Golden Horse Road he was talking about was an avenue very close to the place where they watched the movie last night. There was a long moat there. That's right, we are all here now, come over now, because some witnesses said that you seem to have come into contact with this dead person. Officer Mumu said in a low voice. Have I seen it? This made Yizan even more puzzled, and he couldn't help frowning, vaguely guessing something in his heart. Without any hesitation, Yizan quickly replied, okay, then wait a moment, I'll go out right away. After saying hello to Officer Mumu, Yizan prepared, then left the house, picked a relatively ordinary car from the garage, and headed to Jinma Road. About half an hour later, Yizan finally drove his car and came to Jinma Road. From a distance, he saw that a short section in front of Jinma Road had been blocked, and all the cars and people were diverted to the next road. Avenue. After Yizan parked the car, he hurried to the side where the road was blocked. Two young policemen were waiting outside the cordon. When they saw Yizan coming, they didn't stop him, but hurriedly first report to Officer Mumu. After all, they are all police officers who often handle cases with Officer Mumu, and they are relatively familiar with Yizan. Officer Mumu, who was investigating the scene, knew that Yizan was coming, so he hurried over, took off the white gloves in his hands, and handed them to a young policeman next to him. Yizan, you are finally here. The weather is hot now. After the body was picked up, he didn't dare to move. It was always protected, Officer Miu Miu said. Now that the weather has reached July and August, even if it is only in the morning, after the sun comes out, the whole city becomes very hot. The body has been soaked in the river for a long time, and it is more likely to change. Especially in this weather, it is even more difficult to determine the time of death of the corpse. The influence of the scorching sun will make it difficult to distinguish the corpse. But in order to be able to judge the characteristics of the corpse more accurately, and it is not easy to move the corpse at will, it can only be kept beside. Well, show me there. Yizan nodded and walked towards the direction where the corpse was parked. Soon, under the leadership of the police officer Miu Miu, Yizan soon arrived at the riverbank where the corpse was parked. The police who sent a box and saw Yizan and the two came, and they all quickly moved out of the way. The first time he saw the corpse, Yizan's expression changed. He didn't expect that this deceased, he really knew, was the guy he taught a lesson last night. This man is the boss of several gangsters. Although Yizan doesn't know his name, he still remembers that he has a deep scar on his face. Although he has been soaked in river water for a long time, the scar is still very clear. It turned out to be him, Yizan said involuntarily. Hearing this, Officer Miu Miu looked at Yizan very keenly, and then said to him, "Why, have you really seen this person?" Yeah, Yizan nodded, and told Officer Miu Miu what happened last night. After learning about what happened, Officer Miu Miu's expression also changed, and he said with some displeasure, "It turned out to be a few gangsters who caused trouble. I really don't know if he is dead or alive. He will die here, maybe there is an internal conflict." Quote. Although 5.2 hates these little bastards, after all, human life is at stake, and when such a thing happens, Officer Mumu still has to take care of it, otherwise, he will be sorry for the hat on his head. Yizan glanced at the swollen corpse that had been soaked, and said, "How long has this corpse been dead? Have you figured it out?" Officer Miu Miu waved his hand and called in a fully armed forensic doctor, who was wearing a white coat and a double-layer mask. After the forensic doctor came over, he nodded and said, "According to the various signs on the corpse has been dead for 8 hours, and it has been soaked in river water for at least 5 hours. After listening to the forensic doctor's words, Yizan quickly raised his hand and checked the time. It was exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. Chapter 86-Clue. With a slight squinting in his eyes, Yizan began to infer in his heart that he left before 12 o'clock last night, which means that this guy died an hour after he left. In this case, it is too difficult to locate the murderer of this guy, and I don't know where to start. By the way, who is the one who found the body?" Yizan asked Officer Mumu. The two beards moved, and the police officer Mumu looked into the distance, pointed to an old man sitting on a stone bench by the bank, and said, "It's this old man who found the body and reported it to the crime." Yizan looked in the direction that Officer Miu Miu pointed, and saw an old man in his 70s and 80s sitting on a stone bench drinking water. Beside him, several policemen were watching him. Yizan was also slightly surprised when he saw the old man. Isn't this old man the one who sold them Yuhi's seafood last night? Why is he now called an eyewitness? 30th officer of the Mumu police, Yizan walked in the direction of the old man. He happened to have a few questions and wanted to ask him. He came to the old man. Yizan greeted him and said, "Old man, we met again, do you remember me? I bought seafood from you last night." The old man glanced at Yizan with some doubts in his eyes, and after recalling it for a while, Za suddenly realized, "So it's you, young man, I don't have a good memory, so don't blame me." "No, how could I blame you?" Yizan waved his hand and said, that's it. Can you tell me about the situation where you found the body again? Oh, yes. The old man nodded, and began to narrate the process of discovering the body. That's it, I went back early last night, and I woke up early this morning, so I wanted to come over to set up a stall. After all, there is business here in the morning. Not bad. I didn't expect that as soon as I got to the river, I found a body in the river, so I quickly called the police. After listening to the old man's narration, Yizan's brows couldn't help but wrinkle. According to the information provided by the old man, he couldn't find any clues, let alone where to start. After being in this world for so long, the case that Yizan encountered this time was quite tricky, and he could not find any suspects or motives for murder. But Yizan, who was unwilling to give up, kept looking at the old man with a pair of eyes, and it was inevitable that he had some doubts in his heart. Usually the first person who finds the corpse will be listed as the earliest suspect. Moreover, according to the old man, when he found the corpse, there were no other people around, and he was the only one present. People doubt. Of course, according to normal thinking, it is impossible for an old man in his 70s and 80s to kill a strong underworld gangster. But sometimes, the truth is, the more it lies beneath this incredible idea, the more it becomes reality. Yizan also had some doubts. Maybe this old man was a hidden martial arts master with very strong strength. Killing this little bastard was just a matter of hand. However, after examining the old man's body for a long time, Yizan didn't find anything wrong. All his performances were so normal. Maybe I think too much. How could the murderer be this old man? Yizan shook his head slightly, and had to admit that after he learned to reason, he analyzed a person more and more. Suddenly, a few horns came from not far away, a black car stopped, and two people got out of the car. They wanted to enter the scene, but were stopped. Hearing the noise coming from there, Yizan couldn't help but look over, and found that it was Maori and Shaolin. Officer Mew Mew also saw Maori and couldn't help but say, "So it's Brother Maori, it's really slow to come." With that said, Officer Moo Moo walked over in person, welcomed Maori and Shaolin in, and then brought them to Yizan. In order to come here, Maori seems to have been carefully dressed very professionally, and his hair is combed black and shiny, looking energetic. Seeing that Yizan was also here, Maori smiled and said, "Yizan, you are here too." Before Yizan spoke, Officer Mew Mew said first, "That's right, this case is more complicated, I want to have more helpers and more strength. Yizan, you won't mind." In the detective world, one detective is usually invited for a case, but when a big case is encountered, several more detectives are also invited to jointly solve the case. Now this case, Yizan, has no clue for the time being, and the gross profit has also come. Of course, it will not have any impact. Of course I don't mind. Mr. Maoli is also an elite in the detective world. If he cooperated with him, this case would surely be much simpler, Yizan said. Being praised for 810 likes, Maori is of course very happy. He stretched his hand to the back of his head, and laughed. Yizan is really over the top. Let us cooperate well this time and solve this case. Xiaolan, who had walked to the front, saw the corpse first. Her face changed, and she turned to Yizan and said, "Isn't this the accomplice that the guy named Yamada called last night?" After Xiaolan said this, Yi Shuinkai seemed to remember something, and flashes of lightning flashed in his mind. "By the way, that's the way it is. I'm so stupid, I didn't even think about it." Turning his head quickly, Yizan said to the police officer Mumu behind him, "This deceased had several accomplices before his death, and they all committed crimes together. If those guys are brought over, they should be able to find some important people." Clue. This sentence also caught the eye of the police officer Mew, and he quickly said, "That's great, do you remember the appearance or names of those guys?" Yizan nodded and said, "I remember the name of one of them. It's Yamada. He should also be a gangster in this area. If he is found, maybe the case will be much easier." Chapter 87-Underworld Resistance. As a policeman, in the black and white, there is still some relationship and strength. It is not difficult to find someone. Soon, the police officer Mew Mew found the two police officers behind him and explained to them, "Bring a few people and bring this guy named Yamada to me." "Understood, Officer Mumu." The two policemen nodded quickly, brought a few policemen with them, and went to search around here. Yizan glanced at the hot sun, turned to Officer Mumu and said, "The weather here is too hot. If the body is left for a long time, there will be big changes. We should go back first and wait for a few days to find him. An accomplice should have found the key to this case." Officer Mew Mew is also a police chief who has been in the world for many years. Of course, he understands what Yizan said. He nodded slightly and said, "What you said is not unreasonable. We will go back for the time being and wait until we find the key person in the case." Now that the decision has been made, Officer Mumu immediately arranged everything, protected the body, and moved it into the police car. All the staff quickly removed their equipment and left from this place. Even the cordon, they have also been removed. After all, this is also a downtown area, and it is not a good thing to affect traffic too much. I just came here, and now I have to go back to the police station. Maori's mood can be said to have a big gap. He couldn't help walking in front of Yizan, and said very puzzled, "Why do I have to go back now? My reasoning hasn't started yet." Quote. A slight smile, Yizan said, "Mr. Maoli, we should go back to the police station first, and wait until the accomplice of the deceased is found, when you will show your skills." Maori can be considered confident, smiling confidently. "Of course, as long as I am with Kogoro Maori, I can solve any difficult cases." Soon, Yizan got into the car with Maori and the others, and went to the police station to wait first. This was the first time Yizan came to the police station, only to find out that the place was different from what he imagined. The general civilian staff were separated from the police officers who were going to handle cases outside. As a guest brought back by the police officer Mumu, Yizan was also treated very well. A beautiful police officer poured tea and water, and Xiaolan, who was beside him, pouted and looked at him, as if he was making a sound. Sullen. In this police station, Maori seemed to be very familiar with each other. He chatted happily with the old police officers around him, like old friends for many years, reminiscing about the old days together. This made Yizan a little puzzled. He walked up to Xiaolan and asked, "Your father is doing a good job in the police station. Everyone likes to chat with him so much." Xiaolan picked up a biscuit, put it in her mouth, chewed it a few times, swallowed the biscuit, and said casually, "He was a famous detective before and helped the police with a lot of things. Difficult cases, so I am familiar with these police officers," but later. When it came to this, Xiaolan's expression changed slightly, and she seemed a little lost. When it came to her mouth, she still couldn't say it. Curiosity is the best thing to arouse people's desires. Xiaolan stopped halfway through the words, making Yizan's stomach seem to evoke roundworms, and she really wanted to know the story behind it. "What happened after that?" Yizan said suspiciously. He also wanted to know what happened to Maori. Alas. With a slight sigh, Xiaolan glanced at her father who was still talking about it, then turned to Yizan and said, "Since you want to know, then I'll tell you. A few years ago, my father encountered a very difficult case, a serial murder case. He solved it for a long time without any results, and was escaped by criminals many times, so he was not very happy all the time, and later became more and more frustrated. I heard that until now, the criminal is still at large, and I don't know who is behind such a case." Although Xiaolan only gave a rough idea, Yizan could also guess how difficult the serial murder case she was talking about was. You can see how powerful this murderer is. It's really interesting. The corner of Yizan's mouth was slightly raised at an angle, so that no one else could notice it, but his heart was throbbing. He also wanted to see who could have such a mind, repeatedly escaped from the hands of the police. Ding bell. Suddenly, the phone in the police station rang, and a police officer quickly answered it. After he finished listening to the phone, his expression changed. He quickly stood up, and shouted to Officer Mumu who was handling things in the office. "It's not good, Officer Mumu. something big happened, the police officer who was just sent out. Brother Team, who has suffered resistance from gangsters, is now fighting, and asks us for support. Quote. What? Officer Mu's expression changed drastically. He quickly pushed open the glass door and came out angrily, his fat belly straightening up involuntarily. The angry police officer Mumu bit Kiba and said solemnly, "Those guys are so arrogant, they dare to go against our brothers. That's fine, then let's teach them a lesson." For the police, gangsters are always gangsters, and they dare to resist their arrest, as if they have touched their inverse scales, and absolutely cannot be forgiven. Many police officers in the police station hurriedly sorted out their equipment and planned to go out and fight a tough battle with Officer Mu. After the bullet was loaded, Officer Mumu waved his hand and shouted to the police behind him, "Go." The police officer Mumu, who is still a little fat at ordinary times, seems to be relatively kind, but when he fights crime, he also shows a heroic spirit. He does not bow his head to the sin and is brave to challenge. Yizan narrowed his eyes slightly, and had some hunch in his heart. Before Officer Mumu walked out of the police station, he quickly stopped him and said to him, "Officer, can you take me with you?" Glancing at Yizan, Officer Mu lowered his voice and said, "This is not a joke, we are going to work hard. If you go, I can't guarantee your safety, so stay at the police station honestly and let us the suspects are brought back." Chapter 88-Unspeakable Secret. This time, the criminal case has been somewhat escalated, and it has to become a rivalry and competition between gangsters and the police. Although this seems to have nothing to do with Yizan, in order to find the real murderer who killed the Scarface, Yizan must get to know these guys and even get in touch with those gangsters. Although there was some warning in the words of Officer Mu, Yizan knew that this was for his own good. However, this is also because Officer Mu does not know Yizan's true identity. If he knew his true strength, he probably wouldn't say the same. With a slight smile, Yizan said, "Don't worry, I still have my own way to deal with these situations, you don't have to worry about me." Seeing Yizan's insistence to go again and again, Officer Mu couldn't say anything. After all, Yizan gave them a lot of help in the previous cases. In order to prevent Yizan from being injured, Officer Mu also specially recruited 2 elite police officers to protect Yizan closely, for fear that he would be in danger. Shaolin, who was not far away, saw it and wanted to follow him out, but was stopped by Maori, and persuaded 243, "It's a man's business to fight crime, you're a girl, it's safer to stay here. Now, let Daddy keep you safe." Hearing this, Shaolin turned her head slightly and looked at Maori, with a contemptuous expression on her face. "It's just that you are more afraid of yourself." "Haha, I'm doing it for you too, Shaolin." Maori scratched the back of his head, revealing an exaggerated smile. After leaving the police station, Yizan and Officer Mu and a group of dozens of people got into 3 bread-shaped police cars in batches and drove to the scene of the battle. In this country, gangs are allowed to exist, and their strength is still very strong, and sometimes even the police are not necessarily their opponents. Therefore, in order to catch that guy Yamada, the police officer Mumu has also been dispatched, and they are all real guns and live ammunition, ready to fight a tough battle. According to the instructions from the previous team members, Officer Mumu ordered everyone to go to an abandoned factory in the west of the city. 3 police cars were speeding on the road, and those passing vehicles quickly avoided to make way for these 3 police cars. No one dared to block the road of the police cars at this time. In the car, Officer Mumu also had a very solemn expression, because at this moment, time is life, they are all racing against time, maybe it will only take a minute or 2, someone will die. About 10 minutes later, 3 police cars speeded past and soon arrived at the location of the abandoned factory. When they were still 100 meters away from the abandoned factory, they heard gunshots coming from there. The intense gunfire caused many passing vehicles to flee in fright, and many people rushed to call the police. "It's there," Yizan said hurriedly when he saw the abandoned factory with fireworks through the car window. Officer Mu also found the destination, and hurriedly greeted all the police officers, and quickly drove to there. The sound of the 3 police cars became extraordinarily loud. The policemen who were fighting heard the loud sound of the police car, and their confidence was greatly increased, and the intensity of the attack also increased a lot. On the contrary, the gangsters became nervous and had the idea of retracting. As soon as the 3 police cars stopped outside the gate, the policemen in the car, Yizan and Officer Mumu, rushed out first, and everyone had their weapons ready. Just waiting for Officer Mumu to give an order, everyone rushed out. "We'll rush in." At this moment, inside the abandoned factory, a disgraced policeman ran out quickly. He didn't know what to put on his face, and his entire face was pitch black. As soon as he came out, he ran to the police officer Mumu and said excitedly, "Don't rush in, the gangsters inside are crazy. They have explosives in their hands and are ready to die with us." "What? They dare to do this?" Officer Mu's face suddenly turned gloomy. He really didn't expect that these gangsters were so desperate that he didn't know what to do. After a while, several policemen inside were forced to run out. They all retreated to Officer Mumu's side and told Officer Mumu what was going on inside. It turned out that the gangsters inside had really tied up bombs and were ready to perish with the police who rushed in at any time. "These guys are so crazy, I'm afraid it will be difficult to catch them." Officer Mumu also had a headache. Those guys inside were just too desperate. Yizan was also a little surprised. They just wanted to take these gangsters back for interrogation, but they didn't expect that they would fight for their lives. Could it be that there are secrets hidden among these gangsters? Yizan couldn't help frowning, as if he had guessed something. Turning to look at Officer Mumu, Yizan said directly, "Why don't you let me in? I'll persuade them to surrender." Yizan's words can be said to surprise the police officer Mu. He said, "How can this be done? The gangsters inside are all vicious people. If you go in like this, there will definitely be danger. Let's wait for the negotiator to come." Quote. At such a time, only negotiators, and perhaps there is room to change the situation. Let Yizan take risks, and there is nothing police officer Mumu can do. Although Yizan wanted to say more, but seeing his firm tone and expression, he didn't say anything. Soon, the negotiating expert arranged by the police officer Mumu arrived. It was a man in his 40s, with a pair of golden eyes. He looked very learned, and he was wearing a bulletproof vest all over his body. He wears a hat on his head, which is also made up of bulletproof devices. After seeing that the negotiator was fully armed, Officer Mu said to Yizan, "See, this is a famous negotiator. As long as he makes a move, he should be able to bring us great help, and even convince him in one fell swoop." A few gangsters. Officer Mumu's praise was undisguised, and the negotiator also heard it, which made him feel a light on his face, and he couldn't help showing a smile. Just walked into the gate of the abandoned factory. Chapter 89-Shooting. After the negotiator entered, his voice came from inside, as if he wanted to conquer these bandits with his own words. But I didn't expect that the negotiator had only entered for less than a minute when gunshots were heard inside, followed by the screams of the negotiator. "No, we have to hurry in and save people." Officer Mu's expression changed, and he quickly waved his hand, wanting to lead people in. Unexpectedly, before the police officer Mumu had time to attack, the negotiator who had entered before ran out quickly, and as soon as he came out, he lay on the ground with his legs shaking. Which was the mark left by the bullet hitting it. Thanks to this top-notch body armor, he didn't get hurt, but the bullet bounced from his heart, as if it had let him pass by the god of death, and his face was about to cry. "Are you all right?" Officer Mumu crouched down and said to the negotiator. The negotiator, still shaking, said, "They want helicopters and a lot of cash so they can get them out of here. Get ready." Seeing the appearance of the negotiator, Officer Mumu also knew that the negotiation must have failed, otherwise, there is no need to listen to the conditions of these bandits. Although I really want to reject these conditions, things have come to this stage, and if we don't do what the gangsters say, I'm afraid there will be even greater dangers. Kobo was bidden. Officer Mumu was ready to agree to the conditions of these gangsters, do as they said, and prepare helicopters and cash for them. Officer Mumu, why don't you let me in and try, what do you think? Yizan offered himself again and walked to Officer Mumu. No, it's very dangerous inside. If you go in, you're going to die. Officer Mumu refused, he wouldn't risk anyone's life. But Yizan said, if you don't catch them quickly, I'm afraid it will be the most troublesome thing when they leave here. What Yizan said, Officer Mumu also knew very well that if these gangsters left here, it would not be so easy to arrest them again. Seeing that the police officer Mumu was a little shaken, Yizan said with more strength, don't worry about my ability, they can't treat me like that, I will definitely persuade them. When saying the word of persuasion, Yizan deliberately increased his tone to make his voice more magnetic. Seeing that Yizan was so confident, Officer Mumu didn't refuse anymore. He nodded and agreed, okay, then you can try it, but safety comes first. If there is any danger, run out as soon as possible. Having said that, Officer Mumu also asked others to bring body armor and asked Yizan to wear it, but Yizan refused. Just a joke, Yizan, the most powerful man in the universe, went to see a few gangsters with guns, and he even wanted a body armor on board. If this spread out, where would he put his face? Well, it's definitely not because the ugly Yizan refused, that's it. Pushing open the door of the abandoned factory, Yizan slowly opened the door and walked in slowly. What caught his eye was a row of weeds, which overgrown the large square in the abandoned factory. It is precisely because of this environment that those gangsters have the opportunity to hide in these places. Further back, there are pieces of factories, all of which have been removed, leaving only an empty shelf. Judging from the direction and time of the gunshots just heard, there will be no gangsters in those factories, and they should all be in the weeds. The grass is very lush, and if the gangsters hide in it, it is really hard to find. But for Yizan, these are not difficult things, as long as he relies on the existence of qi, it is very easy to find them. Just looking around, Yizan had already determined the specific locations of several gangsters, and even knew their height and weight. Humph! With a sneer at the corner of his mouth, Yizan said, if you guys keep hiding, I can guarantee that you will never want to get out of here. Soon as Yizan's voice fell, a rougher voice sounded, what are you want to scare me, do you really think I was scared? After finishing speaking, a crisp gunshot flew out from a corner of the grass and rushed straight to Yizan's body. The speed of this bullet is very fast. If it really hit Yizan, it is estimated that it will spit out several mouthfuls of blood without breaking bones. But something surprising happened. When the bullet was about to hit Yizan, he bent down slightly and was about to tie his shoelaces. Bang! Then the bullet hit the door frame, but even Yizan's clothes Kakuzu didn't touch it. The gangsters hiding in the grass could hardly believe what was happening in front of them. Yizan actually avoided the bullet. Under the shock, several bullets flew out of the grass immediately, all of which flew towards Yizan's body. It's just right. The corner of Yizan's mouth was slightly the same, and when the bullets were about to charge, he quickly stretched out his hand and quickly grabbed it into the air. Shish, shish, several wind sounds rang out, and Yizan's right hand, like a ghost, flashed quickly. When Yizan's hand fell, the bullets seemed to disappear out of thin air, and he didn't know where they went. Although he didn't see the gangsters clearly, Yizan had already determined their positions, and sneered suddenly, and threw all the bullets in his hand back. Give it back to you, and let you enjoy yourself. Yizan snorted coldly, and a king's aura came out. Whoosh, whoosh, several bullets flew out at the same time, but in different directions, and quickly got into the grass. Ah, ah! Several screams came from the grass, piercing the sky, and the screams were heart-wrenching. Chapter 90_Fact. After the screams came from the grass, Officer Mumu and others who were waiting outside immediately loaded their bullets and wanted to rush in to rescue Yizan. Don't be afraid, Yizan, we'll come in and save you right away. Officer Mumu shouted outside the door and was about to rush in after raising his legs. They all thought that the scream just now came from Yizan's mouth. Don't worry, you guys wait outside first. I'm fine, leave these guys to me. Yizan's voice came from inside the abandoned factory. Hearing Yizan's voice again, Officer Mew Mew was relieved, and at the same time, he was very shocked. There were gunshots inside, and Yizan was still safe and sound. At this time, in the abandoned factory, Yizan just shot at random, and the gangsters were all hit by bullets. Although these bandits seemed to be hiding in the grass, to Yizan, they were transparent. He could know where they were, even standing or squatting, all at a glance. The gangsters hiding in the grass were covering their wounds at this moment, trying not to let themselves make a sound. The sweat on their faces had already formed a thread and fell to the ground drop by drop. After seeing Yizan's power, these gangsters were already scared, and no one dared to shoot again. They sent a signal to each other to prepare to retreat from this abandoned factory. Inside the tall grass, the 5 figures slowly retreated to the back, heading towards the last corner of the grass, as if they wanted to escape from there. But how could their small movements escape Yizan's observation? The corner of his mouth raised, Yizan said coldly, "If you want to go out from here, don't ask me if I agree or not." After speaking, Yizan stomped his right foot on the ground, and several stones flew up, all of which fell into Yizan's hands. With a flick of the finger, the stones flew out, targeting the black-clothed gangsters. These stones immediately flew out like bullets, so that the gangsters were all hit by these stones before they could react. Several tragic screams sounded again, and the weapons in the hands of the bandits were all scattered, and they were hit by the impact and flew forward. The wooden guy outside gave it. Hearing the screams inside again, the police gun in his hand was gripped a little tighter. He lowered his voice and said, "Yizan, what's the situation inside?" Now that these gangsters have lost the ability to resist, Yizan also said, "Officer Mumu, you can come in now, they have all been subdued by me." Although he was a little surprised by what Yizan said, Officer Mew Mew didn't hesitate, and with a wave of his hand, he let his subordinates rush into the abandoned factory with him. Crash! The moment the door was opened, the gun in Officer Mumu's hand immediately pointed into the distance with a solemn expression on his face. Seeing the entire square in front of him, Yizan was standing alone. Officer Mew Mew couldn't help asking, "Where are the gangsters? Have they all run away?" Yizan shook his head, pointed to the front, and said indifferently, "Those gangsters are all in the grass. Hurry up and look for them. If you go late, maybe they will really let them run away." Although this sentence was unbelievable, Officer Mumu couldn't doubt Yizan's ability, so he had to ask his subordinates to find someone in the grass. After a while, more than a dozen police officers, with 2 police dogs, rushed into the grass to find the gangsters hiding inside. Sure enough, a few minutes later, the 5 gangsters in black were all caught. They were all shackled, and not one was left. A young policeman came to Police Officer Mumu and saluted. "Officer Mumu, all 5 gangsters have been caught." Really? Officer Mew Mew was really shocked. When he turned to look at Yizan, he didn't know how surprised he was. He didn't expect that the gangster was really caught by him, and it was so easy. Now that the gangsters have been brought out, Officer Mew Mew also knows what to do next, so he hurried to the side of the gangsters. In order to find out the truth of the matter, Yizan also walked over and stood side by side with Officer Mumu. These 5 gangsters wore a black mask on their heads, so that people could not see his original face at all, nor did they know who the person inside the mask would be. "Take off their masks," Officer Mumu told a police officer. Soon, the policeman walked to the side of the gangsters and pulled off the masks of the gangsters as soon as he reached out, revealing their true colors at the same time. Yizan was very surprised, because he recognized it at first sight. "One of the gangsters here was Yamada, who I saw last night. I didn't expect this guy to be a vicious person." Yamada also seemed to have discovered Yizan, and when he looked at Yizan, he couldn't help but turn his eyes back, and did not dare to look at Yizan. The truth of the matter can be confirmed. Yizan's expression became a little dignified. He walked directly in front of Yamada, and said solemnly, "I never expected that, Yamada. You are still a gangster who can use a gun, not just a gangster." That's it. From the moment he saw Yizan, Yamada seemed to have guessed something, and he was not afraid, but showed a sneer. "Since you have found me, if you have anything to ask, just ask quickly. Well, if I'm shot later, you won't have this chance." Hearing this, Yizan was basically certain that what these guys did was not a little bit. His eyes narrowed slightly, and then he said, "Tell me, did you kill that accomplice of yours?" Quote. At this time, Yamada didn't feel the slightest bit of fear. It was a world of difference from the little gangster before. At first glance, he looked like a robber, and he was still a very vicious one, with murderous aura in his eyes. Somewhat scary. Chapter 91_Shaolin Face Yuhi. When asked this question, Yamada didn't even deny it, and said directly, "Yes, we killed him ourselves. There is no way. Who told him to want to share more, so we can only share if he dies. More." These words were like a wake-up call that woke everyone up. Yizan easily noticed the tricks in it. It seems that what they did was not just a little bit. "Why do you divide the loot unevenly? Please explain the specific situation in more detail." Officer Mumu said aside. He did not forget to add, "If you want to hide something, it will only have a greater impact on you." Now that it has fallen into the hands of the police, Yamada seems to have given it his life, showing a sad smile, and then said, "It's already like this anyway. Since you want to know, then I'll tell you. Before a month and 30, a total of 6 of us planned a jewelry robbery. After planning for a long time, we finally started a week ago and grabbed more than 100 jewelry necklaces. Later, when we divided things, Dog Guy felt that he contributed the most and wanted to get big points, but we didn't agree, so of course we killed him directly." Listening to Yamada's words, it seems that all the cases and things have been explained in the most reasonable way. The guy who was killed should be the Da, he said. It is a common occurrence in the Taoist way, and it is not uncommon to kill accomplices due to uneven distribution of spoils. Officer Mu's expression changed, and he said in surprise, "Could it be that you did the case of the theft of LLK jewelry a week ago?" After explaining everything long ago, Yamada had nothing to be afraid of, and immediately nodded, "Yes, so what if we did it?" After learning the result, Officer Mu's face added a few more smiles, and he said with a longer mouth, "I didn't expect it to be true this time. It takes no effort to get through the iron shoes. Get caught." The case was solved, and one case caused another case. Of course, the police officer was happy. Cuff them all and escort them back to the police station to wait for the trial. Officer Mumu waved his hand. Of course, he did not forget that he was able to make this case go so smoothly and capture the characters of these gangsters. Turning around, Officer Mumu smiled at Yizan. "Yizan, it's really thanks to you this time. Without you, we might have to spend a lot of time again. I will definitely apply to the mayor to let you do it. Of our full-time detectives." Quote. With so much credit, as long as Yizan is willing, he can get the greatest fame, wealth, and even some power. Of course, for Yizan, these things are just some past clouds and smoke. What he wants, no one can give, only himself. Yizan refused. "No need, the credit this time belongs to everyone. Officer Mumu, you can just give the credit to others." Such a high-spiritedness made Officer Mumu admire him immediately, and he almost gave a thumbs up and praised him in front of Yizan. It's really a hero and a boy, and it's rare to be so indifferent to fame and fortune. Officer Mumu nodded and said. But then, Officer Mu rolled his eyes again and said to Yizan, "But I don't understand a bit, why are these gangsters injured? How did you do it, Yizan?" In fact, since the first time he came in, Officer Mu has always had this question, but he just didn't say it. Yizan didn't bring any weapons in, how could he subdue all these gangsters, and even injure them all? Indifferent smile, Yizan said. "It's nothing, this is a secret weapon I bought with money, it's specially used to deal with gangsters, I just used it casually just now." As soon as he heard that it was a secret weapon, Officer Mumu was relieved. He also knew that every rich person would buy some weapons to protect themselves, and these weapons were usually magical, or very powerful. After explaining, and dispelling the suspicion of Officer Mumu, Yizan quickly said, "Since everyone has been caught, we might as well go back earlier, and then we have to interrogate these guys." "Okay, let's go back first." Officer Mumu nodded, immediately ordered to go down, and went back with a group of police officers. This time, the case can be said to be relatively dangerous. If Yizan was not there, it is estimated that Officer Mumu and the others would have faced much more trouble. Soon, the 3 police cars returned to the police station. Maori and Xiaolan, who had been waiting in the police station for a long time, ran out of the room as soon as they heard the sound of the police car and waited outside. The first police car that came in, Maori looked through the window, just to see clearly that the gangsters were all arrested. No, Yizan and the others really caught people back. 160 inches Maori was also a little shocked by Yizan's credit. I don't know if they were injured. It was Xiaolan, who was still worried about Yizan's safety. When she saw Yizan and the others came back safe and sound, Xiaolan's face showed a smile, and she went to the front with Mao Li to wait. After the 3 police cars entered the police station, Yizan and Officer Miu Miu also got out of the cars. The other police officers in the police station have also queued up, waiting here to meet and greet Yizan and the others. Yi Xuanwei came back with Officer Mumu, and also wanted to see what good things they stole from Yamada. As soon as she saw Yizan, Xiaolan also came over very happily. Suddenly a hug came. She hugged Yizan, and said excitedly, "Yizan, it's great that you're fine." In front of so many people, Xiaolan made such a move, which made Yizan feel a little surprised. He didn't expect that the 2 of them were progressing very quickly. Xiaolan suddenly broke free and ran back with a slight yuhi on her face. Chapter 92-Old Man. Mao Li also came over at this time, gave a thumbs up and said, "Yizan, you are really amazing. I just heard them say that the case was solved by you. I passed the prize. This is just what I should do." Yizan smiled indifferently, but he was thinking about what happened to the case that made Maori lose his fighting spirit. Soon, Officer Mumu ordered other police officers to lock up Yamada and several others, and conducted a major interrogation. When the results of the interrogation came out, Officer Mumu personally led the team to find the lost jewelry and necklaces. It took several hours to bring these things back. Yizan and Xiaolan also witnessed in the police station how large the jewelry and necklaces robbed by these guys were. They filled several boxes before they were all filled. After solving 2 major cases in a row, Officer Miu Miu also got the approval from the top. He wanted to reward Yizan well, but Yizan refused, and he gave the credit to Maori. Unexpectedly, he picked up a bargain in vain, and Mao Li was so excited that he kept thanking Yizan. Even when the TV station came to interview, Yizan asked Mao Li to speak up. To Yizan, fame and fortune are really nothing. What he pursues is more precious things. This serial case caused a sensation in the whole city and attracted widespread attention. So soon, those reporters rushed to the police station. When police officers Maori and Mumu were surrounded by a large group of reporters, Yizan said to Xiaolan, "Let's go out for a walk. I heard that the sunset is very beautiful." "Okay, I also really want to see it. I heard that it is a very beautiful scenery." Xiaolan smiled, her eyes narrowed into a gap. Soon, the 2 walked out of the police station. Yizan drove his car, loaded Xiaolan, and rushed to the river bank together. The closest viewing place to the city is the beautiful river bank. Only here can you see the best sunset. When the 2 came to the river bank, many couples had already played in this place. There were some beaches on the bank. Young men and women liked to watch the sunset in this place. The feeling is very desirable. Wow, this place is really beautiful. When Xiaolan came here, she also showed a surprised expression, and quickly got out of the car and walked to the shore. Yizan also smiled faintly, followed Xiaolan's footsteps and walked there together. He also wanted to release himself and enjoy life when he was happy. With more and more cases being solved, Yizan's thinking has also begun to change gradually. What he is now pursuing is not just pure power, but a higher artistic conception. Soon, when the two came to the beach, Xiaolan was as happy as a child, running on the shore non-stop, playing with the river water, mixing it with the sand and making various shapes. Kind of thing. Seeing Xiaolan having such a good time, Yizan also took out his body camera and took a few recent photos of her. Finding that Yizan also brought a camera, Xiaolan hurried over and said in surprise, "You brought a camera, it's great, then let's take a few pictures together." Okay, Yizan nodded slightly, and the two took a selfie on the beach. But no matter how the two of them took pictures, they were only recent photos, and the angle was not captured very well, so Yizan wanted to find someone to help them take pictures together. His eyes looked around, Yizan's eyes suddenly lit up, and a familiar figure entered his eyes. Why is he here again? Yizan was slightly surprised. Not far from Yizan and the others, the old man was setting up a stall not far away, making some yuhi grilled seafood and selling it to young people who were playing here. Xiaolan also found the old man and couldn't help but say, "Isn't that the old man from last night? Why is he here?" "Maybe it's doing business here," Yizan replied indifferently. "Really, let's go and buy some yuhi seafood to eat. I didn't eat enough last night. What he cooks is really delicious." Xiaolan smiled, holding Yizan with both hands, a little greedy look. "You are really a foodie." Yizan smiled and stretched out his hand, scratched Xiaolan's nose, and said, "Then what are you waiting for? Let's go right now." In fact, what Yizan has been paying attention to all the time is that the old man looks a little weird. Every time he appears, he gives people a strange feeling. If it was an ordinary person, he would not have noticed this feeling at all, but Yizan was different. His strength had already surpassed that of people in this world, and he would have different feelings about some special things. After putting away the camera, Yizan and Xiaolan walked towards the old man. Xiaolan wanted to eat yuhi grilled seafood, but Yizan wanted to know the truth. Seeing someone coming, the old man immediately smiled and said, "It's you, it's really fate, we met again, do you want to eat something?" Of course, Xiaolan ordered a bunch of things very rudely. "Anyway, there is Yizan, the rich man here, so don't worry about ordering more." It was Yizan, with a smile on the corner of his mouth, and then said to Xiaolan, "Would you like to go to the beach and buy some drinks? I happen to be a little thirsty." Xiaolan is not stupid either. She naturally guessed that Yizan had something to do and wanted to tell the old man, nodded and said, "Okay then, I'll go buy it now." After Xiaolan left, Yizan lowered his voice, stared at the old man in front of him, and said, "I have a question that I've always wanted to ask. I wonder if you can answer it." He seemed to have guessed that Yizan would have something to ask himself. The old man had no sense of surprise at all. Instead, he showed a smile and said, "If you have any questions, just ask, and I can answer you." "Very good." Yizan nodded and said, "That's right, you found the corpse this morning, but according to the situation at the scene, the corpse should have been tied to a stone before sinking into the river. How did you find out? Did you fish him out yourself?" Chapter 93 Who is Xiaolan going to date? Hearing this, the turbid eyes of the old man who was making seafood on the iron plate suddenly flashed a bright light, raised his head slightly, glanced at Yizan with an admiring look, and then said, I knew for a long time that no matter how flawless I did, I would still be discovered, hee." Quote. As soon as he heard this, Yizan knew that there must be something hidden in it, and immediately said, "Then why did you do this, can you tell me?" The old man's eyes glanced into the distance, and then he turned around and said, "This should have started a long time ago, when the guys in Yamada were just gangsters in this area, and there was no robbery at all. The courage of the jewelry store, but even so, they have done a lot of bad things. Finally, one day, they stole a family's money and squandered it everywhere. You know, this is all the savings of a family, ready to use. He came to pay for his daughter's medical treatment, but because he had no money, the family's daughter died of illness, and his father was reduced to selling yuhi's seafood." After listening to these words, Yizan was silent, and he didn't say a word. He let the seagulls on the sea fly, and the waves kept hitting the beach, but his thoughts became a little heavy. The expression on his face condensed. Yizan nodded slightly and said, "I understand." At this time, Xiaolan, who went to buy a drink, also ran back from a distance, holding 3 glasses of fresh orange juice in her hand, and quickly arrived at Yizan's side. Wiping the sweat from her forehead, Xiaolan handed a drink to Yizan and said, "I've been queuing for a long time to buy this." After finishing speaking, Xiaolan gave another cup to the old man and said, "Grandpa, you have worked hard too, take it and drink it." The busy old man didn't expect Xiaolan to be so kind to him, so he couldn't help being a little moved. He looked up at Xiaolan and seemed to think of his daughter. Slowly reaching out and taking the glass of orange juice tremblingly, the old man said, "Thank you. It didn't take long for Yuhi to cook the seafood." Xiaolan packed it and took it in her hand. While eating, she said happily, "It's really delicious, really delicious." Being able to get Xiaolan's compliment, the smile on the old man's face became even brighter. No matter how hard it was worth it. Soon, after playing on the beach for a while, Yizan and Xiaolan went back. On the way back, Yizan has been thinking about a question: sometimes the truth, is it really so important? After just thinking about it for a few minutes, Yizan gave a positive answer in his heart. That is, it is necessary to understand the truth, and the analysis of fate is thorough enough. After sending Xiaolan back, Yizan returned to his residence. As usual, after taking a comfortable hot bath, he was ready to rest. Before going to bed, Yizan also deliberately sensed his own understanding of fate. After this case, although his understanding of fate was better, it was still not enough. Lying on the bed, Yizan closed his eyes and slowly fell asleep. What he didn't notice was that the beads placed beside the bed emitted some light blue light, but it was only a flash. Pass. This bead was officially left by Suzuki Sonoko, and what is preserved here is all her power and soul. The next morning, Yizan woke up for the first time in the world. There was no other way. There was no exercise at night. Yizan woke up unexpectedly early. Goro's detective office to see, maybe in his detective office, there are more cases to be solved, which can bring him more understanding of fate. A fast-moving luxury sports car was running on the street, attracting the attention of many people. It was Yizan who was sitting in the car. Soon, Yizan drove the car and came under the Maori Detective Agency. After parking the car, he bought a breakfast and was ready to visit Maori and Xiaolan. Carrying breakfast to the door, Yizan just rang the doorbell when Maori's very impatient voice came. It's early in the morning, do you want people to sleep?" Yizan was not angry, but said lightly, "It's me, Yizan." Crackling. As soon as Yizan finished speaking, there was a screeching sound from the room, and then there was a scream of Maori. It seemed that he was too anxious and bumped into something. Bang dang. The door was opened immediately, and Maori, who was still wearing pajamas, showed an excited smile. It turned out to be young Master Yizan. "Really welcome, please come in quickly." Yizan was not polite either. He brought his breakfast directly and walked into Maori's detective agency. He was a private detective agency with meals, accommodation and office. Seeing that Yizan brought breakfast, Maoli immediately rubbed his hands and smiled and said, "Young Master Yizan is so polite. We are all so familiar, why do you need to bring something to eat?" "Oh, I saw someone selling breakfast below, so I brought it here by the way." "I think you haven't started eating breakfast yet." Yizan put the breakfast on the table and smiled lightly. Taking a look around, Yizan asked, "By the way, what about Xiaolan, why didn't you see her?" Usually when Yizan came here, Xiaolan got up very early, but today she didn't expect everyone to disappear, and she didn't know where to go. Maori had already picked up the breakfast and sat down on the sofa to feast on it. While eating noodles, he replied, I heard that there was a date and went out early this morning." When he said this, Maoli didn't forget to take a peek at Yizan's expression, as if he was paying attention. Sure enough, upon hearing this, Yizan's expression changed. his brows furrowed, and he quickly asked, "What? She went on a date? With whom, and where did she go?" When he said this, Yizan frowned and looked a little angry. Although he knew that this matter was likely to be fake or misunderstood, Xiaolin was the woman she had decided on, and she couldn't help but be angry. Maori, who was eating noodles, was also taken aback by Yizan's expression, and quickly said, "I don't know very well, you should ask her yourself." Seeing Maori's nervousness, Yizan realized that he was a little too aggressive, and withdrew his hand in embarrassment and said, "I'm sorry, I'm just curious, where did Xiaolin go?" Maori took a sip of his face, looked disapproving, and said, "Forget it, I won't take it to heart, you young people's affairs, solve it yourself." "Okay, I'll go out first, and I'll leave all of this breakfast for you." Yizan greeted Mao Li, and then stepped out of the gate. After getting in the car, Yizan first calmed down his mood, and then analyzed, "This doesn't make sense. Conan has been sent abroad by himself. Who else can Xiaolin date here? Could it be that Maori lied to me?" But after thinking about it this way, Yizan felt that it was unlikely. If it wasn't for the date, Xiaolan would not have gone out so early. After thinking for a while, Yizan decided to call Xiaolin first and ask her what was going on. Taking out his mobile phone, Yizan dialed Xiaolan's phone number, and when the other party connected, Yizan pretended to be nothing and said to Xiaolan, "Hey, Xiaolan, where are you now? I'll come to you. I'm looking for you at home. Are you not at home?" Soon, Xiaolan's voice came over the phone. "It's Yizan, I'm sorry, I have an appointment today, so I came out early, I'm really sorry." Hearing that Xiaolan herself admitted to going on a date, Yizan breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, her woman did not choose to hide it from him. Yizan tried his best to keep his tone calm and said, "Then where are you going on a date? If it's convenient, I'll go there too. There is something I want to tell you." Yizan wanted to see what kind of man he was going to date Xiaolin. This was the woman he had decided on, and no one could think of her badly. Surprisingly, Xiaolin didn't reject Yizan's words and replied, "Okay, then come along, we'll be at Yuhixiang Cafe, see you then." "Okay, see you later." Yizan also agreed, and then hung up the phone. Putting away the phone, Yizan's eyes flashed a bright light, and then he lowered his voice and said to himself, "Is it Yuhixiang Cafe? I'll be there soon." Chapter 94-Coffee Shop. Yizan, who was very unhappy in his heart, drove the car directly to the destination that Xiaolan said. He wanted to see what the person Xiaolan was going to date looked like. At this time, Z slipped a few mouthfuls of Maori, looked at him from the window, and said involuntarily, "This is really troublesome, young man." Yuhixiang Cafe is a relatively elegant place. Yizan and Xiaolin have also been here a few times, but most of the time Maori is also there, which spoils the atmosphere of the date. What Yizan didn't expect was that this time Xiaolin even asked someone else to meet here. "Hey!" With a muffled sound, Yizan's sports car swept across the ground in a single swipe, and the tires rubbed out a trace, and stopped exactly in front of the cafe. Such a handsome sports car, coupled with its elegant driving skills, has long attracted the attention of passers-by. Many young girls have begun to wink at Yizan. With that kind of feeling, I wish I could get to know Yizan now. But how could such a girl attract Yizan's attention? Without looking at the people around, Yizan quickly got out of the car and walked into the cafe. "Welcome." Just as he walked in, two young and beautiful waitresses came out and bowed deeply to Yizan with a lovely smile. These two waiters are quite beautiful. Yizan took a few more glances at them and thought to himself. "Excuse me, sir, what would you like to drink?" A waitress had already taken the order and came to Yizan's side. After finding a place to sit down, Yizan took the list and glanced at it casually, and said, "Bring me a cup of coffee." "Okay, wait a moment, sir." The waitress immediately went out and prepared coffee for Yizan. Sitting by the window, Yizan began to look at the coffee shop, and found that it wasn't very big, but it was decorated quite elegantly. Many young people like to come here for dates. It's really good at picking This place is very interesting. Yizan's face sank slightly, and his expression was a little unhappy. It's still relatively early, and there are not many people who come to drink coffee. There are only a few elderly people sitting in the corner, reading the newspaper and drinking tea. Just these few people were immediately excluded by Yizan. This could not be Shaolin's date, and they were too old. After the coffee came, Yizan waited for Shaolin while drinking coffee in the store. At this time, the door of the coffee shop was pushed open, and a thin, medium-sized woman, carrying a small satchel, walked in a hurry. "Welcome," the two waitresses said respectfully. But the woman looked very upset, the corners of her mouth raised, and she snorted coldly, "Come on, give me a cup of coffee, I want coffee." After finishing speaking, the woman found a seat by herself and sat down, put the satchel aside, looking very upset, as if everyone else owed her. This woman's temper is really hot. Yizan couldn't help but look in the direction of the woman, feeling a little puzzled. The woman also glanced at Yizan's side, but didn't say a word. She turned her nostrils up, and continued to look out the window, as if there was something to worry about. Not long after the woman came in, a young man also came in from the outside, with a thick notebook in his hand. His hair was a little messy, as if he hadn't washed it for a long time, with a pair of framed eyes, wearing a Chinese tunic suit. There is no doubt that he has a strong Diocese temperament. As soon as the man walked in, he said to the two waiters, "I'm here to write a paper. Please find me a quiet place. I don't want to be disturbed, thank you." "Okay." One of the waiters agreed, and walked to the side with the Diocese college student, and found a secret location. Two people came one after another, but they couldn't see Shaolin, so Yizan couldn't help but be a little puzzled. She hadn't come yet. Did she want to let go of her pigeons? Just when Yizan was thinking wildly, another figure walked in outside the door. His movements were very graceful, and he made a sound when he walked. Before people saw it, they smelled a unique fragrance, which made Yizan couldn't help but look over, wanting to see who it was, who smelled so good. I saw from the door, a woman in a black uniform with her hair tied up. This woman's body is so good, her huge two balls, a slender waist, and her ass, every part of it is full of what men want. Especially her figure, which is wrapped in the uniform, gives people an invisible beauty, and people can't help but look at her a few more times. Although the woman wore a pair of gold wire glasses, it added a bit of charm to her, and her beautiful face became more mature and colorful. "What a beautiful woman!" Even Yizan couldn't help but exclaim in his heart, "Such a beautiful woman is simply mature." After the woman came in, she said to the two waitresses beside her, "I'm here to wait for someone, but I haven't arrived yet. It seems that I'll have to wait a while longer. Find me a seat first." "Okay." The two waitresses nodded, and soon brought this sexy woman to the back of Yizan, a seat not far from him. After the woman sat down, Yizan couldn't help but looked back and looked at the woman's body. He didn't want to be discovered by the woman. Suddenly, he raised his head and stared at Yizan with a pair of shrewd eyes. Seeing this woman, Yizan dodged his eyes for a moment, then turned his head quickly, returned to his position, let out a long sigh, and said in his heart, "This woman is really not easy." Not long after, another person came into the coffee shop. This was a man of 5 or 3 thicknesses. He looked very rough, and the ring finger of his right hand was still wrapped. As soon as he came in, he talked with Kai, the owner of the coffee shop, as if he was very familiar. Chapter 95-Fei Yingli. After a while, another man came in. He was young and handsome. He was wearing a suit and had long flowing hair. He was very handsome and sat in the coffee shop. After seeing this man, Yizan's expression couldn't help changing, and he couldn't help but say, "Could it be this guy? Is this the person Shaolin wants to date?" After the man came in, he started to call. The other party seemed to be his friend. He said happily, "I have something to do today, so I won't go to you to play. I have an appointment with a girl, she is very beautiful." After speaking, the man suddenly laughed and continued to chat with his friend about Heavenly Path. "Woman, say a few more good things. It's not easy to catch, haha, let's not talk about it, I have to behave well. After the man hung up the phone, a cold light flashed in Yizan's eyes, and he secretly said in his heart, it's you who dares to date Shaolin. You must look good later. After waiting for a long time, before Shaolin came over, Yizan became impatient. He tapped the table lightly with his right hand, and looked around casually. During this period of time, no one else came to the cafe, but many people went to the toilet and walked around the cafe a few times. Ding ding ding. At this moment, Yizan's mobile phone rang, and when he took it out, it turned out to be an unfamiliar number. But even so, Yizan answered, and Shaolin's voice came from the opposite side. Yizan, I'm so sorry, I wanted to bring you some cakes, but the silver reception machine here is broken. Now, there's no way to get my money, I'll keep you waiting for a while, do you see if the person I'm dating is here? A lot of people came, which one do you say? Yizan asked of course. The one with long hair, did you see that? I see, sitting not far from me, with long black hair, right? Yizan's tone was a little unhappy. Yes, but she will tie up, Shaolin said on the other end of the phone. Yizan looked back and found that the man had tied up his hair, so he said a little unhappily, yes, he has tied his hair up. Shaolin also seemed to hear Yizan's unhappy tone, and immediately said, what's the matter, Yizan, are you upset? I'll be here soon, don't be angry. Hearing Shaolin's coquettish tone, Yizan also took a deep breath to make his tone a little more happy, and then said, I'm fine, come over quickly, I'll be waiting for you at the cafe. After hanging up the phone, Yizan raised a sneer at the corner of his mouth, and said secretly in his heart, damn it, I will kick you away later, and let you know the consequences of angering me Yizan. Just as she was about to kick the man away, the sexy woman sitting behind Yizan suddenly stood up, walked to Yizan's side, showed a faint smile, and said, little handsome guy, I can sit down here. Hearing this voice, Yizan looked back and saw that it was the beautiful woman in uniform. He couldn't help but get excited and said with a smile, sit down, it's okay, I'm the only one here. At this time, Yizan thought in his heart, anyway, Shaolin hasn't come yet. It's better to chat with the beauty first, and then teach that guy a lesson later. This mature and attractive woman smiled at Yizan, then stroked her short skirt, sat opposite Yizan, took out a business card and handed it to Yizan. This is my business card, please give me more advice. Quote. Business card. Yizan was stunned for a moment. He originally thought that the other party was here to chat with him, but he didn't expect to bring himself a business card first. Could it be to sell insurance? But soon, Yizan still took the business card and glanced at it. Law firm, Fei Yingli, phone XXXXXX. This. After Yizan read this business card, his expression changed, and his heart was extremely shocked. The woman in front of him was actually Shaolin's mother. He clearly remembered that in the original book, Shaolin's mother was Fei Yingli. He didn't expect to meet here this time, but why she wanted to chat with him, this made Yizan a little confused. On the surface, Yizan still pretended not to know anything. With a pair of eyes looking at Fei Yingli's body, he couldn't help but admire. A real woman is really a stunner. That old boy Maori doesn't know how to cherish it, compared to that Shaolin, even more beautiful. While thinking about it, Fei Yingli also spoke up. She smiled and said, are you Yizan? When asked this question, Yizan was slightly taken aback, but nodded and said, that's right, how did you know me? Ha ha. With a slight smile, Fei Yingli said, the last time you solved the case of Lawyer Shang, you are quite famous in our entire legal profession. How could I not know you? Really, then I'm really honored. Yizan smiled slightly, and his eyes kept looking at Fei Yingli's body. Fei Yingli is used to Yizan's look. She was a recognized schoolgirl back then. She is very confident in her figure and appearance. Although she has grown a little bit older, she has grown more mature charm. I have to say that Yizan was almost convinced by the charm of Fei Ying 1.0 Li, and Chunin couldn't help thinking to himself, if Maori doesn't have time to take care of it, then he can do it himself. Just as he was about to have a few words with Fei Yingli, the man who answered the phone before suddenly stood up from his chair and walked forward a little unhappy. "What's the matter? It's been so long and I haven't come," the young man grumbled as he walked towards the bathroom. Yizan also noticed the man's movements. When he first came in, Yizan had been paying attention to him. If this guy really dated Xiaolan, he would not forgive him easily. Unexpectedly, not long after this guy walked into the bathroom, suddenly there was a scream. Chapter 96_Detective's Reasoning. Hearing the screams, everyone present was startled. Yizan's expression changed, he quickly stood up and ran towards the bathroom. Fei Yingli also followed quickly, and the speed was not slow. It looked like she had been exercising. Similarly, the other waiters and guests of the cafe also rushed over, and for a while, the bathroom was crowded. Yizan and Fei Yingli were the first to arrive. At the door of the bathroom, the long-haired man was trembling with fright. He leaned nervously against the wall, his face turning pale. Following the man's gaze, Yizan saw that in a toilet in the bathroom, the door was tightly closed, and a pool of fresh yui-colored blood quickly flowed out from it. "Someone is inside." Yizan immediately frowned, and had a bad premonition in his heart. Quickly running to the door of the toilet, Yizan squatted down, jumped up, and climbed onto the door frame on the 30th floor outside the toilet. Looking inside, I happened to see a woman with a hole in her chest, lying in the bathroom. Blood was flowing non-stop, her eyes were wide open, and at first glance, she had lost signs of life. And this woman, the woman who was in a rush and was in a bad mood when she just came in, didn't expect her to be killed here. Jumping off the door frame, Yizan hurriedly said to the others, "Hurry up and call the police, someone is dead inside." "What?" The owner of this cafe, when he heard this, his eyes froze, and he almost fainted. In the end, it was the employees of the coffee shop who called the police in time. Officer Miu Miu brought a team of police officers and rushed to the coffee shop. As soon as the slightly fat cafe owner saw Officer Miu Miu coming, he rushed forward and said a little excitedly, "Officer, you must seek justice for me, I don't know what's going on here. Who did it? If the murderer cannot be found, my small shop may not be able to open." Police Officer Miu Miu is usually a little dignified, wearing a cape, nodded slightly, and said directly, "I know, with Yizan and I here this time, this case will definitely be able to help you solve." From the moment he came in, Officer Miu Miu found Yizan, but he didn't expect him to be here too. At the same time, the man standing beside Yizan also made Officer Miu Miu's eyes light up. He walked over excitedly, stretched out his hand, and said, "Attorney Concubine, why are you here too? It's such a coincidence." Ah! Looking at Officer Mumu's appearance, Yizan could easily guess that they had known each other for a long time, and Officer Mumu admired this beautiful concubine lawyer very much. However, it was obvious that the concubine lawyer didn't seem to be very interested in the police officer Mumu, so he shook hands casually, and regarded it as a greeting. "Lawyer Concubine, why are you here today?" Officer Miu Miu still leaned up and spoke with a warm face and a cold buttocks. However, Fei Yingli didn't look at police officer Mumu, and said indifferently, "I asked a friend to come here to meet, but she hasn't arrived yet." "So that's how it is." Officer Mumu showed a smile. After all, he was here to solve the case, and it was difficult to say too many words, so he had to withdraw his smiling face, put a straight face, and face everyone. "Judging from the preliminary form of the fundamental case, this is a premeditated murder case, and all of you present are suspect," Officer Mumu said in a low voice. Sure enough, as soon as these words came out, the expressions of the people present could not help changing, and no one liked to be suspected as a suspect. As if remembering something, Officer Miu Miu added a sentence after you. "Of course, Lawyer Yizan and Concubine will definitely not be the murderer, so the two of them must be ruled out." Cough cough. Yizan coughed slightly, attracting everyone's attention, and then he said, "Officer Mumu, there is no need to exclude the two of us. Since we are both suspected, we should investigate them one by one. Indeed, Officer Mumu, you should just do business. Fei Yingli also nodded and agreed. Since both of them said so, Officer Mumu had nothing to say, nodded and said, well, then let's treat everyone as suspect and be subject to interrogation. Having said that, after inspecting the whole scene, Officer Mumu couldn't help but fell into deep thought, then raised his head and said to Yizan, I don't know if Yizan has any suggestions. The current case seems to be a bit complicated. After all, Police Officer Mumu can only handle cases and arrest people. He is not very good at this kind of reasoning that consumes brain power. Moreover, with Yizan here, he doesn't want to spend all this energy, he just wants to catch the murderer quickly. Having been familiar with Officer Mumu for a long time, Yizan didn't refuse, just nodded and said, since the case happened in a coffee shop, then all of us who have been to the toilet are suspected of murder. For 920 weeks, Yi Shuenkai continued, when I was sitting outside, I deliberately observed this side. From the very beginning, except for the deceased who came to the bathroom, Mr. Huang who came to write the thesis, Mr. Dianshan with a strong body, the owner of the cafe, Mr. Prince, and Miss Yingli have all been here, so there is a possibility that you all have doubts. Seeing the changes in the faces of several people, Yizan said again, of course, as long as you can prove your innocence, you will be able to clear your suspicions. Officer Mumu glanced at the door frame of the toilet, it was empty, just as long as the murderer climbed over there, he could kill the dead. Thinking of this, Officer Mumu's eyes lit up, and he said quickly, I understand, the space inside is all closed, and the toilet door is locked from the inside, the murderer must have climbed over the door frame and killed him. The victim died and then crawled out. Quote. Yizan glanced at Officer Mumu with a slightly surprised look, and said, I haven't seen you for a few days. Officer Mumu's reasoning ability is very good, but I want to ask you again, the deceased was stabbed in the body, why did the blood only reach the handle, but not elsewhere? Chapter 97_Fei Yingli's analysis. When asked this question, Officer Mumu got into trouble at once. After hesitating for a long time, he couldn't answer the question. He frowned, and after thinking for a while, he said, I can't think of this method. The corners of his mouth were slightly the same. Yizan brought the wrapped murder weapon from the police officer beside him, and then said, from the tool of this sword, the other party was stabbed to death by this sword, but from the point of view of the modus operandi, the murderer definitely did not directly kill with a knife. Quote. How was it killed? Not only Officer Mumu, but others also turned their attention to Yizan. They all wanted to know how the murderer killed the victim. Picking up a rope that fell from the side, Yizan's eyes narrowed, and he lowered his voice. If I guessed correctly, the murderer must have used this rope to tie the knife to the knife, then stab the deceased, and then stab the knife to death. It was thrown into the toilet and placed with the dead. Hearing this, the police officer Mumu seemed to have a clue and said quickly, then, according to what you said, the murderer did this on purpose, and the purpose was to influence our judgment. Yizan snapped his fingers, nodded and said, congratulations, you got the answer right, it is indeed the case. At this time, Fei Yingli, who was listening to Yizan's analysis of the case, also clapped her palms and said with admiration, as expected of Yizan, this case looks complicated on the surface, but in fact, you have already reasoned about it, it's really amazing. Ah. Fei Yingli stepped on her high heels, walked to the door frame of the toilet, reached out and touched it, and then her hands were stained with blood. Spreading her palms for everyone to see, Fei Yingli said, look, blood will be stained on the door frame, and the residue is so thick, this is very strange, it is reasonable to say that if the deceased was killed in the toilet, no matter how much blood splashed out like this, it wouldn't leave so much blood on such a high door frame. Such an important inference caused everyone present to change their expressions, and seem to feel a pressure. Fei Yingli's eyes seemed to want to see through everyone, and it seemed that they wanted to tell the truth. Yizan's eyes couldn't help but squinted, and he was a little surprised. Fei Yingli's observation and discernment are really strong, no wonder he has become such a famous lawyer. When Fei Yingli said this, she stopped, then turned her eyes to Yizan, winked at him, and said, "This is my inference, it's up to you next, Yizan." Zan Xiao handsome. In front of so many people, being called a handsome young man, Yizan couldn't help but feel a little smug in his heart. This is a beautiful woman, who wouldn't be moved by her. But when the case reached the critical moment, Yizan didn't have time to think wildly here, narrowed his eyes, nodded his head heavily, turned around and said to everyone, "So, the most critical part of this case is the murderer's technique, which can be obtained from the on this high door frame, push the dead into the toilet." Quote. As soon as these words came out, the expressions of the people present changed. Ran Nian looked at each other and seemed to want to see who was the murderer of the deceased. There were a lot of people present, and it would be very difficult to investigate them one by one, but Yizan has now given the prerequisites, and the person who can push the deceased into the toilet is the most suspect. A slight bulge, Yizan suddenly stretched out his finger and said, "There are only two people here who can do this. One is Mr. Dianshan, and the other is the owner of this cafe." What? After hearing this, the strong Dianshan and the slightly chubby coffee shop owner both took a few steps back and almost didn't fall to the ground. The most excited was Dianshan. He hurried forward and said, "Don't talk nonsense. I don't know the dead person at all, and I don't know who she is. Why should I kill her?" The slightly fat cafe owner also quickly retorted, "Although she often comes to my store to drink coffee, she is my customer. Why should I kill my customer? Isn't it unreasonable?" Quote. "Ha ha." Yizan sneered a few times, and then said, "This is just a sophistry for yourselves. In fact, it is very simple to identify the real murderer. As long as you do what I say, you will know who it is." The truth of the matter was about to be revealed. The owner of Dianshan and the cafe were both nervous. The two of them looked at each other, then turned to look at Yizan, and said at the same time, "What do you want us to do?" Yizan snapped his fingers, and then said to the waitress next to him, "Please find 2 books and 2 pens." "Well, okay," the waitress agreed, and then ran out quickly, bringing 2 pieces of paper and a pen after a while. Yizan divided the things in his hand into 2 parts, handed them to the owner of Dianshan and the coffee shop respectively, and said to them, "You can write a few words on it at will, and then give it to me." Seeing that Yizan was so mysterious, the 2 suspects were a little nervous and dissatisfied, but because so many police were here, they had to do the same. Soon, the 2 wrote a few words on the notebook and handed it to Yizan. After taking a look at what the 2 of them had, Yizan just made a slight comparison, then a cold smile appeared on his face. He pointed at the coffee shop owner, and shouted angrily, "Yes, the murderer. It's you." "Ah." The owner of the coffee shop, as if he was struck by an astonishing flash, his face changed greatly, but he still struggled to say, "You are talking nonsense, it is not me at all, you have no evidence." "If you want evidence, then I'll give it to you." Yizan snorted coldly, and took out a torn piece of paper from his pocket. Shaking the ball of paper in his hand, Yizan said, "This is what I found next to the trash can at the door just before I entered the bathroom. The writing on it is full of confessions to the deceased. The handwriting on it is exactly the same as yours. What else do you have to quibble about?" Chapter 98_date somewhere else. "What?" The owner of the coffee shop suddenly turned pale, as if he had collapsed, and took a few steps back. Sighing slightly, Yizan said, "I already guessed that the murderer was one of you, but I didn't expect you, the coffee shop owner, to have an ambiguous relationship with her female customers. But you have a wife. The deceased finally forced you to divorce your wife, or else your family will be destroyed, but you have murderous intentions and killed the deceased, isn't that so?" Yizan's inference can be said to be accurate, causing the fat owner of the coffee shop to step back several steps in a row, and then bumped into the wall, with a sad face, and said in great pain, "Yes, you said it's not wrong at all, I did it all. Who told her to threaten me?" Many employees of the coffee shop were stunned. The boss, who usually seems to be very kind and honest, turned out to be such a person, and he would do such an unconscionable act. "Quick, arrest him." Officer Mew Mew waved his hand and let several officers rush up. In front of him, no evil was allowed. The fat boss also seemed to know that as long as he was caught, he would be finished. In a fit of rage, he quickly ran up, shouted loudly, and ran to the door in the direction of 927. The official concubine Yingri, who was standing at the door, looked at the coffee shop owner rushing over, but her expression did not change, as if she was not afraid at all. "Get out of the way, you stinky bitch!" The fat boss shouted angrily, looking very angry, with two big hands, as if he was going to push Fei Yingli down. However, just as he had just arrived in front of Fei Yingli let out a low voice, quickly stretched out a hand, put it on the fat boss's arm, then took a step forward and put his foot on the fat boss's arm. Abdomen, let him eat pain and shout. After this, Fei Yingli suddenly exerted force, and with the help of the strength of his hands and feet, he pushed up a big fat man, and threw it with a beautiful shoulder, hitting the ground heavily. Ouch! The fat boss screamed, and then fell to the ground with a groan. His eyes were a little confused, and when he looked forward, he was a little dizzy. Taking advantage of this time, several police officers had already run over with handcuffs in their hands, and immediately grabbed the fat boss and made him unable to move. Yizan was also a little surprised. Fei Yingli was really different, very powerful. Taekwondo has reached the level of pure love. If you want to control a woman like her, a man can't be tough without being strong. The criminal was caught, and Officer Mumu wanted to come over and thank Yizan again. After dispersing everyone, Officer Mumu said to Yizan, "Yizan, think again, if you are interested in joining us." Yizan waved his hand and said, "Let's talk about it next time. I have other things now, so I won't say more." Officer Mumu was about to say something else, but Yizan had already hurried out of the coffee shop and went outside the gate. When he just dispersed everyone, he wanted to come out, but was pulled by Officer Mumu. "Xiaolan should be here now, I have to call her." Yizan quickly took out his mobile phone and dialed Xiaolan's number. "Hey, is that Yizan? I'm rushing to the coffee shop right now. I've made you wait for a long time. I'll be there soon." Xiaolan's voice rang on the other end of the phone. Yizan also quickly told everything that happened in the coffee shop, so that Xiaolan didn't have to come, and then the two agreed to meet at another place. This time, the place where the two agreed to meet was a movie theater not far from the cafe. Since the coffee was not enough, they had to go to the movie theater. Yizan rushed to the cinema quickly, but when he arrived at the entrance of the cinema, he found that there were already many people lining up there. After searching in the crowd, Yi Shuangkai found Xiaolan, who was holding a box of cakes, next to the cinema, with a young girl. Although this young girl is not as beautiful as Xiaolan, she has short hair and a delicate face. She also looks a little cute, and her figure is not bad. Yizan hurriedly walked over and waved at Xiaolan. "Hey, Xiaolan, I'm here." Xiaolan also saw Yizan, and also beckoned, signaling Yizan to come over quickly. When Yizan came to Xiaolan, Xiaolan narrowed her eyes into crescent moons and said with a smile, "Let me introduce, this is my good friend Lingxi, this is Yizan." When Lingxi with short hair saw Yizan, little stars appeared in her eyes, and she said excitedly, "Wow, you are so handsome, Xiaolan, is this your boyfriend?" Xiaolan's cheek turned to Yuhi, and she retorted with no confidence, "It's not, we are just good friends." "Really?" Lingxi continued to tease with a look of disbelief. "If you don't like it, just let it go to me." Speaking of this question, Xiaolan snorted. "No, you already have your prince, isn't he coming soon?" Speaking of this, Reiko became angry and said a little unhappy, "That guy doesn't know where he is going. It's the first time to meet a girl, and he's late. It's really annoying." The two girls kept talking, but it made Yizan a little embarrassed to stand here. Shouldn't he be the protagonist? There was no place for him to interrupt. "Hey, Reiko, I'm sorry, I'm late." At this moment, a man with long hair in a handsome suit rushed over from the crowd. Hearing this voice, the three of them turned their heads and looked over there, but Yizan's eyes couldn't help changing, and he was a little surprised. "Isn't this the one in the cafe? What's the prince's guy?" Quote. Xiaolan was still smiling and said, "Lingxi, your prince is here. Isn't he the person you want to date? Yizan said to Xiaolan in surprise. He's Reiko's date, and I came with her. Xiaolan blinked mischievously and said with a smile. The prince, who thought he was very handsome, quickly walked up to the three of them, and quickly apologized to Reiko. I'm sorry, I encountered something at the cafe, and I'm only here now. Chapter 99_Xiaolan and Fei Yingli. Seeing the handsome prince coming, Reiko immediately showed a smile, waved her hand and said, It's okay, we just came here just now. That's right. The prince fiddled with his long hair, made a move he thought was cool, and smiled at Reiko. In that case, let me invite you to a movie to express my apologies. Hee, why are you embarrassed? Lingxi smiled lightly, but her eyes kept looking at Yizan and the prince, as if she didn't know which one to choose for the two handsome guys. Yizan smiled slightly beside him and said to the prince, I don't know who it was just now, but if a girl just needs to coax her, she'll be there. As soon as he heard this, the prince's expression suddenly stiffened, and when he looked back, he seemed to realize that Yizan was behind him, and his expression suddenly became embarrassed. Reiko is not an idiot either. After a little thought, she can guess what the handsome Mr. Prince in front of him is thinking. With a cold snort, Reiko turned her head to one side, not wanting to say a word, and the prince kept explaining. In the end, Xiaolan said a few good words, but Reiko didn't care so much, and the four of them went to the cinema together to watch a movie. Soon, the movie was over, and after coming out of the cinema, Yizan rubbed his eyes and couldn't help sighing. The screen in the cinema is really too big now, it's not very comfortable to watch, if it would be nice to have 3D. Quote. 3D, what is it? Xiaolan blinked her big eyes beside her, and said very suspiciously. This. The technology in this world is still relatively backward now, and Yizan has no way to explain so much, so he had to type a haha and bring this sentence to the past. The prince originally suggested that everyone go to dinner together, but Xiaolan refused, so after curing the prince and Lingxi to eat, Yizan accompanied Xiaolan out for a walk. It's still early in the sky. Yizan and Xiaolan were walking on the street. Yizan couldn't help but ask, why don't you go with Lingxi? Xiaolan glanced at the distance, sighed slightly and said, actually, there is one person I haven't seen. I just sent a message and agreed to wait here. So that's the case. Yizan nodded. Without asking too much, he waited here with Xiaolan. After a while, Xiaolan's cell phone rang. After connecting the phone, she hung up the phone after chatting with the other party for a few words. Then she turned to Yizan and said, the person we're waiting for is here. Here, Yizan turned his head and looked in the direction Xiaolan pointed, just in time to see a woman in sexy clothes walking over. After seeing the true face of this woman, even Yizan couldn't help but be slightly surprised. This woman was none other than the Fei Yingli who had just met. Fei Yingli was wearing a sexy short work skirt and waved when she saw Xiaolan from a distance. Xiaolan also clearly saw her and shouted happily, Mom. As expected, Xiaolan made an appointment with her mother. Yizan thought to himself. Soon, their mother and daughter met together. When the two met, Yizan watched and wanted to say hello to Fei Yingli, but he didn't know what to say. Finally, after Fei Yingli and Yi Xuanxian spoke, the two greeted each other. Fei Yingli took a look at Yizan's body and said with a smile, Daughter, is this the person you are bringing to meet me today? He is indeed a handsome guy. Mom, he's my good friend, Yizan. Xiaolan kissed her mother's side in a very clingy way. Ha ha. Fei Yingli covered her mouth with her hand, smiled softly, and said, Mom understands, we just met. What, have you all met? Xiaolan said in surprise. Fei Yingli nodded and said, I was also present in the case that happened in the cafe just now. After listening to what her mother said, Xiaolan smiled indifferently, this is really fate. A pair of eyes scrutinized Yizan's body again. Fei Yingli seemed to be looking at her son-in-law, looked at Yizan up and down, and whispered to Xiaolan, You have to be careful, this young people are not easy, be careful to be deceived by him, tell your mother the truth, how far have you developed? Quote. Although the voice of these words was small, Yizan heard it clearly beside him. With his strength, it was very easy to hear these words clearly. And Shaolin's face was even more Yuhi, and she twisted slightly and couldn't help saying, "Mom, why do you say that? He and I are just good friends." After all, Fei Yingli had come here, and of course she knew exactly what her daughter was thinking about, but there were some things that she didn't want to say so clearly. Yizan was a little embarrassed when he saw the situation, and immediately said, "We rarely meet once, so why don't I treat you as a guest today? How about we go for a big meal?" Since someone treats a guest, and it's someone her daughter likes, Fei Yingli certainly won't refuse. She nodded and smiled and said, "Okay, then you can decide." After seeing concubine Yingri's agreement, Yizan immediately brought their mother and daughter to a relatively high-end restaurant nearby, where the three of them had a good meal. After the meal, Yizan originally planned to send the concubine Yingli back, but because he had a car, he rejected Yizan's kindness. After Fei Yingli drove back by himself, Yizan and Shaolin wandered on the street for a while, and it was not until Maori called, Yizan sent Shaolin home. When Yizan returned by himself, it was already 11 o'clock at night. He was driving the car while playing music, and a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. If you want to get a beauty like Shaolin, it is not enough to rely on money and strength. It also takes enough time and patience. You must take it slowly and not rush. Chapter 100-Healing Garden. As usual, when he returned to his residence, Yizan took a bath and went to his bedroom to rest. Yizan found that after this cafe case, Yizan had a better grasp of the trajectory of fate. But even so, Yizan still feels very dissatisfied. After spending so much energy and time, Yizan still has no complete control over the trajectory of his destiny. You must know that once he controls his destiny, he truly stands at the top of all existence. The mountains shattered in a single thought, and the sun and the moon changed between the waves. These are not too simple for those who truly control their destiny, and it is a pity that Yizan has not yet reached that point. It's really a difficult thing. Yizan couldn't help but sighed, but he wasn't too impatient. Anyway, it was just playing. He yawned a lot, ready to take a good rest. Dee. But at this moment, Yizan's cell phone suddenly rang, but it was called on the 18th. Number 18, do you miss your husband? Called so late. Yizan's mouth cracked into a smile, as if he saw the beautiful face of number 18 over the phone. After connecting the phone, the excited voice of number 18 came from the other end. "I have found a way to travel through time and space." Ah, Yizan listened to number 18's mindless words. "What did you say?" "I found a way to travel through time and space." On the 18th, he said to Yizan again, "Remember what I was busy with a while ago?" "Of course I remember. After you left, your husband and I couldn't sleep alone, and there were some problems in the garden. Poor me, I can't sleep all night long, you don't know." "Husband, be serious, I mean it, you know. Once it's really successful, we can travel through time and space at will." Number 18 said to Yizan. Yizan became serious. "How do you say it? It's not an easy thing to know." Yizan's words made number 18 say seriously. "A few days ago, I found the organization behind the scenes through the clue of Conan becoming smaller, got the drug, and then started to study it, and found some time and space shuttles in it. The mystery of it. Quote. Then according to this, we can travel in time and space." Yizan said excitedly. "Ah, this, that, I'm afraid it's not enough. Now this technology can only be applied to ordinary people, so we don't seem to be able to use it." On the 18th, Yizan wilted in an instant. "Oh, I see." No, 18 seemed to be well aware of Yizan's reaction, and said with a smile, "By the way, husband, what you said before is right. I miss you so much now. So, I am now with a sister papered as shameful things. Do you want to listen?" The wilted Yizan was instantly revived with blood. "Of course, turn your voice up to the max, I want to hear the clearest version." He. With the laughter of the 18th, Yuhi's ears were reddened on the phone soon. Early morning. Yizan's whole person seems to be too much, his eyes are blank, and his eyes are dull and appear in his villa. If it is said that Yizan and number 18 or many sister papers are really going to do something that will lead to this situation, Yizan will not be like this. But the key point is that Yizan didn't do that, but was abruptly suffocated. I'm really sad. Yizan felt like he was about to cry. After washing his face vigorously, he woke up a little, but he still couldn't hold back the boiling thoughts in his heart. I don't care, I can't bear it anymore. Go and stabilize Sonoko's injury temporarily. Yizan said something and walked towards the room where Yuanzi was. After so long research on Yuanzi's injury, Yizan can actually be cured. However, in order to make Yuanzi's recovery better, Yizan did not help Yuanzi to heal the injury. Well, stabilize the injury first. Yizan said slowly, his hands quickly sketching beside the garden. The other side flowers bloomed rapidly, and then withered. Not long after, Sonoko slowly opened his eyes. Hee. Yizan grinned after seeing Sonoko sober. He finally didn't have to continue living in such a miserable way. My dear Sonoko, let's do something we love. Yizan said with a smile as he looked at Suzuki Sonoko. Floating for half a day. Yizan spent half a day doing this kind of exercise that he liked so much. It was not until noon that when he received a call from Shaolin, Yi Shuangkai got up from Yuanzi's tender body and answered the phone in a daze. Hey, who is it? Me, Shaolin. An angry voice sounded on the other side of the phone. Ah, it's Shaolin, what's the matter? Yizan said in a daze. Don't forget that we are going to Yuanzi's house today. Mao Lilan's voice rang on the other side of the phone. Yizan seemed to see Mao Lilan's angry look. Ha, of course I didn't forget. Yizan got up quickly with his eyes wide open and talking nonsense. I didn't forget, then hurry up, it's already noon. Okay, I'll come. Yizan was about to get up when Yuanzi suddenly stopped Yizan. Are you going to my house? I'll go too. Yizan heard the words, glanced at Yuanzi, who was a little weak, and nodded. All right, with me here, nothing serious will happen. As Yizan said, he took Yuanzi and drove his sports car to pick up Shaolin from the Maori Detective Agency. With the sound of the engine, Yizan and Shaolin quickly left the city and drove to a forest on the outskirts. As soon as they entered the forest, Shaolin's expression couldn't help changing, and she complained. What are you doing? The villa camping you mentioned is actually in such a remote place. Yizan looked at Mao Lilan and said, that's why you don't understand. The people who can afford villas are high-ranking officials and wealthy businessmen, and these people are busy all day, so naturally they want to live in a remote place where no one is disturbed. Place, which is characteristic of many villas. Quote. Why don't you live in a remote place? Mao Lilan retorted when she heard Yizan. Yizan grinned. Of course there are a lot of girls in the downtown area. There are pretty girls everywhere, ho. Seeing this, the two women gave Yizan a blank look and got out of the car together. Because there is a river across, so the parking lot at 1.9 is still a little away from the villa, and the three of them walked towards the villa on foot. Seeing the dense forest around the villa, Shaolin said in surprise, no way, is this villa in the mountains? Yes. Following Suzuki Sonoko's words, Suzuki Sonoko took Yizan and Shaolin across a chain bridge, and the other end of the chain bridge was the destination of the trip, the villa. It's finally here, it's great. After walking for so long, Shaolin couldn't help being a little excited. Soon, the two of them walked over to the bridge. When they were not on the rope bridge, they happened to see a man in a black cloak and a big trumpet hat walking on the bridge. Seriously, he couldn't see his true face at all. After seeing the man, Shaolin couldn't help shouting, Hey, the person in front, did you go to Yuanzi's house together?